So I was just on a Zoom call and I can't remember how many Zoom calls it's been this week or this month or this year.
Was it
Lots
was
of
it
Zoom
maybe a
calls.
squillion? Was it a
Yeah,
squillion?
something in that ballpark. Yeah. And somebody announced to us that when the host saves a chat at the end of the Zoom, that they can see all of the chats, including the chats that you thought were private between you and other users. And
I did not know this at all.
I believe, yeah. So about 3 people on that Zoom call's mouths literally dropped open. Like, oh shit.
Yeah, I don't like, I mean, I love that I know that now. I don't love thinking about how much of the shit talk I have participated in is,
No, that's a fantastic PSA. Everybody needs to know that the person hosting the Zoom call can see your private Zoom discussions. Hopefully the people hosting Shannon's Zoom calls also did not know that. That's the only way that she's going to get out of it.
Yeah, and send some beer to the people who posted your Zoom calls recently that you may have offended.
I talk shit in the private chats, but like those people already know how I feel about them. So I think I'm okay. But I've done a lot of Zoom calls in the last like 6 months. Oh my God.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, it's hard to say for me. Depends on the day. My mood varies and the level of salt varies as well. So
wow. I mean, now we know.
I don't think I regret anything that I've said, but
we're gonna find out.
We'll see. Reach out if I've offended you, and I'll think about whether or not I'd like to apologize.
Well, guys, speaking of saying things we're all going to regret, you guys want to start this episode up?
Oh my gosh, yes.
Voices, the things they said. Voices, some from those dead. All the voices heard. Voices, things we say. Voices, they're in your head. All the voices heard.
Hello, everyone. You have Kempa.
And Skylar.
And Shannon.
And no Flo tonight because she is wrapping up the Measure U meeting, which a little less of a barn burner than last month, but it was still a really interesting meeting.
But the Master of Crows wasn't there. He was the main event last time. Right?
That's what I really missed. Yeah. But we do have a great guest tonight today, whatever time you're listening. In City Councilmember-elect Katie Valenzuela. Katie, thank you so much for coming back on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
I missed you all.
Same.
We did too. It was really hard to get through all of these episodes without you.
This is like old times too, because Flo wasn't on the show yet when we did our
That's true. Episode. That is true.
That's true, yeah.
But it's also not like old times because we're not in the same room.
Yeah. Also,
I don't have any White Claw, so I feel like
no.
Oh shit!
I was gonna try to get there, and I just didn't. So I have to.
It's understandable. Sometimes I'm like sprinting to the corner store.
Our White Claw sponsors will understand. I think it mostly just applies to us.
But we're so excited to have you because there's one other difference from the last time we were on the show. Last time. It was soon after your debate with Councilmember Steve Hansen, but you are now, you have won the seat, you've won the office, and now we are just, 4 or 5 months away from you actually taking office at City Council. Tell us how that's all been.
Pretty wild, because like right around the time I felt like a human again and had slept and started like trying to reconstruct my apartment and life, a pandemic hit. So it never really felt totally real. We didn't.
Which pandemic is this that we're talking about?
This little virus. I think it's called COVID something.
Right. No, I did hear of that. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Okay. It's okay. But yeah, and then I went into shelter in place and we went into crisis management mode and trying to make sure unhoused folks had water and that people knew what was going on. And so, yeah, it felt like we jumped straight from campaign into governing. and even though I'm not sworn in yet, I mean, a lot of folks are already turning to me, as they should, because they see me as like someone who wants to help them. So I'm trying my best to be an elected official with no staff and no resources and no power. And it's been pretty interesting.
Oh, that's wild.
Why is it that, I mean, can anybody tell me why it is that we wait like more than or like almost a year from when the election happens to when you actually take your seat? Like, what's the rationale for that many months being in between?
Yeah. It's because she won the primary outright with over 50% of the vote. So she doesn't have to be a part of the general. Usually you're in the general in November, and then you're in office within 2 months after.
Yeah. Okay, that does make sense.
Not only that, California has just moved up its primary elections and presidential years to early March so that we can be a part of Super Tuesday and actually make a difference in these races. So that makes it even more far off than it originally would have been in previous elections, because those
we used to do it in like June, right?
June, I think. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a huge transition period.
Huge amount of time. Yeah.
And even though it was quote unquote just like 4 months ago, it feels like 2 years ago that this happened because of coronavirus.
Right.
How are you like us in that time? Is like, we were all realizing that time is a construct. And what are you doing with this realization?
Absolutely. Plus, I live by myself with 2 dogs. And my neighbor the other day asked me if I had gotten a roommate. And I was like, why? And she's like, well, you keep saying we. Like, who's we? And I'm like, oh, it's my
oh,
dog.
no.
I'm like, I'm talking about my dogs like people now. Like, we've crossed into that space. She's like, oh, I just thought you had a roommate or something.
Just immediately. It's better than you like turning into Gollum or something.
Yeah, there were really only 2 options.
Yeah.
And you got the good one.
Definitely. But it's been great. I mean, I'm still working full time. And so it's essentially like I do my daytime Zoom calls for my day job. And then I switch over and do evening Zoom calls for council. And it's been pretty consistent. So some days feel long, but then like retroactively, it feels like it went really quick. But yeah, being just on calls all the time, like helping people figure out who to call for like a bike issue, helping people figure out like what to do if they need help with something. It's just, and plus the big stuff, like people's budgets. So it's been wild.
Yeah.
I fall asleep really well at the end of every night.
I have no doubt.
I bet.
Dope.
Well, just so the listeners know, today's episode, it's basically, Katie is the centerpiece of it, but we also, there's a lot happening right now. So we're going to be discussing throughout the episode the Measure U meeting that happened the Monday before we published this episode. And that's, like I said, why Flo's not here, because she chairs that committee. We'll also be discussing Strong Mayor, and throughout we'll be threading in any sort of topic we want to discuss with Katie as a council member-elect, right? So you mentioned the people's budget. We talked about that at length last episode. Could you just speak to, you've been credited in a number of outlets for this being your brainchild for Sacramento. Could you speak to that a little bit and where that came from and, why this is important to you?
Honestly, it was after the first hearing when we all tried to call in after the protests and the rallies in June, when we said, you know what, the police are getting an increase in budget. This is our chance. Let's make a statement. And I was so frustrated by the response of the council or lack of response, I should say, to anything that people were saying. And I was like, man, I hate the fact that we just keep asking and they don't do it. And finally, I was sitting on a friend's porch, 6 feet apart, just hanging out, trying to decompress. And I walked home and was like, oh, well, why don't we just propose our own budget? I mean, People's Budget LA was gaining a lot of traction, and Black Lives Matter LA did a really great job with that. And I thought, well, that makes sense. Like, why should we wait for them to make a proposal that meets our needs? Why wouldn't we make our own proposal? It's our money.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's really how it started. And I pitched it. I called Alika the next day from Black Justice Sacramento, because I was going to speak at their Juneteenth event, and said, what do you think?
Is that Alika Bernard?
That is Alika Bernard. Okay. And she said, oh my gosh, I think this is what we've been looking for. And things just kind of took fire after that.
It's cool. It's an exciting concept. Do you know what the timeline is on all of this? When do you start actually engaging, the people on this?
Yeah, we're hoping by the end of the month. It's getting pushed back a little bit because the survey design is the most critical part, and we have voluntold Miss Flo Kofer, Dr. Kofer, to come help us with the survey design to make sure it's good. Because there's things about the LA survey that we liked and that we didn't like, and so we wanted to make it more both what we wanted to try to prioritize and focus on. But yeah, hopefully we'll see that, because the goal is to have something together in late August in time for the county budget update, which is due in September. They only adopted a 3-month budget when they did that in June, I believe. So we're trying to get something in place for when NAVGIL proposes the budget in mid to late August, and then the county or the city budget will be up again for the mid-year review in November, December. So that's the timeline we're working at for both. The survey will be just in general, because all of us who live in the city also live in the county. So why make it complicated? Just say, what do you need? And then we can try to figure out a proposal that meets that needs and advocate for that.
Yeah. So it sounds like the two major issues facing the city and I guess the county in this regard, that you've been discussing with people and prepping for have been, Black lives and budgeting.
Yep, basically. But honestly, the budget for me, it comes down to all of the issues. And that was what was so beautiful when we settled on this as the campaign, is I'm like, from services for unhoused folks, from data collection, from like getting better engagement and how we prioritize services, to like going upstream and funding youth interventions and economic development. It all comes down to resources. And there's so much resources being consumed by one part of our budget. If we could free that up, we could address all sorts of issues in our community.
Yeah, that's really cool. Well, why don't we jump into the meeting, this Measure U meeting that happened in the past, but is also currently happening as we speak. Again, time is a construct. So the Measure U meeting that happened this week.
Can we just do will you do like a quick 30-second recap just in case somebody has never heard of the Measure U thing?
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, before.
So Measure U, or who wants to do this?
I'll do the 30-second one. Yeah, so basically Measure U is something that we passed, what was that? That was 2018. That we passed that, and it's like it adds on an additional half-cent tax. It was sold to the voters as something that would go to like provide economic bolstering and development for areas of town that need a little extra help. And basically it's just kind of like a half-cent tax to just sort of have this thing. And it was sold to people as like, we're going to spend it on, social services that don't have the funding that they need, or like put it into neighborhoods that are struggling economically or whatever. And now that things have gone the way that they are attempting to take all of that money that was supposed to go to those sources and instead give it all to police services. Or not all, but a substantial enough chunk to where it's completely not acceptable, especially because a lot of the police brutality and the police issues are happening in these communities that were supposed to be lifted up by Measure U. So a lot of people kind of feel like money is instead being given to the people who are causing a lot of the problems in those communities.
The first half-cent was passed after the 2008 recession, and that was basically to re-up the funding to help them build up the police department again. The second half-cent, as Skylar mentioned, it was supposed to be dedicated toward inclusive economic development. But as we've all seen, and as Flo has very publicly and very succinctly pointed out, like Skylar was saying, that something like 71% of the second half-cent is supposed to this year go to police and fire. When not only that, but they tried to they basically succeeded in passing this budget while making sure Measure U committee was not meeting under the guise of, there's a pandemic, we can't do it. And it wasn't until Flo forced their arms and said, I'm going to have this fucking meeting whether you like it or not, sue me on the Brown Act, I'm still going to make it public, that they finally bent to her will.
Right. Well, so the Measure U committee also, by the way, was just like something that that we agreed on with the city when they implemented it. It's like, fine, we can do this, but we want to have our own committee of people who actually represent the people who live in these communities, to oversee that, they make sure that the money goes to where it's going. So the city said, okay, yeah. And so they have a Measure U committee, but then after COVID happened, they basically just told the Measure U committee, like, oh, all your meetings are suspended or postponed or whatever, and then just tried to pass the budget without even letting them meet. So they were like trying to avoid oversight. And like Dave said, it didn't work because people like Flo are super tenacious.
Yeah, and just a second note on that. This is not 30 seconds, but it's tough to give it that.
There's a lot of details.
Yeah. So listeners know, this is an advisory committee. It doesn't have the teeth that people really wanted it to have. That said, hey, listen, money's going to go here because we say it should. It's basically just the committee saying, here's our recommendation on where this money should go.
Well, because it wasn't written into the language. And I mean,
Right.
this is actually when I first met Flo was around this, when she was part of the table, and we were part of a group of neighborhoods that decided to oppose Measure U because we had been asking for budget transparency. We wanted accountability. We wanted racial impact assessments and neighborhood assessments. And we wanted an oversight committee that actually had binding authority over the whole budget, not just over Measure U. And we knew the mayor had promised it 6 times over, and there was no way he was going to follow through on these promises. And they waited until the last meeting before they could pass it for the ballot to take it up. So your choice was either to say yes or no. And of course, everybody said yes because they wanted the money. And then here we sit 3 years later, I mean, saying the exact same thing, which is like, we knew this would happen. We knew he made promises he couldn't keep. And by he, I mean the mayor. And now he's here.
Yeah, and that meeting, I remember, friend of the show, Sedalia King, presented the advisory committee, concept to them, and everyone was smiling at her. They're like, "This sounds great," and then they were just like, "But man, we're just not sure if we have time to change the language. Like, I don't know. It's getting down to the last few days, so we can't change the ballot language to make this binding, to make it so you actually have teeth on this committee." And so basically Angelique Ashby, District 1, was up there, and she's just like, "We don't have time. We're not doing it." And that was that.
The last meeting was really fun because that was the meeting when the mayor mixed us up with the table. And he kept saying, "No, we responded to your letter." And I'm like, "No, you didn't." And we had this weird back and forth during public comment because he likes to argue with folks during public comment. And
I remember that. Yeah.
Right now. Yeah, it was me and Tanya from Black Lives Matter. We're just like, what's happening right now? We just want an answer to our question. Do we get this or no?
Well, let's move on to kind of what happened at the meeting tonight. Can somebody speak to what the proposed budget, Measure U budget, that they will be sending back, I believe tonight they're voting on it, to City Council?
Yeah, I can do it. I'm super, super confident in my ability to do this. So at the last
I'm
meeting,
sending the JPEG.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Printed out.
Yeah, I'm a planner, so I think we should start by saying that at the last meeting there was a proposed budget that Flo had worked on prior to and made available to the committee members. Sorry, I was trying to think about what their titles are. And what that included, so there was the proposed budget, which was, this is not the one that Flo put together, but the proposed budget was a 47% allocation to police, a 24% allocation to fire, a 16% allocation to youth and parks, 5% to economic development, and 9% was miscellaneous. So Flo countered that by saying that we need to put 45% into economic development, 16 into fire, 18 into youth and parks, 7 into affordable housing, 10 into homelessness, and 4 ends up being miscellaneous, which, and maybe Katie, you can speak
Also
to this.
0 into cops.
Yeah, I was going to say
I'm sorry,
nothing
yes,
for
and
cops.
0 into cops. Sorry, I should have started with that. Katie, maybe you can talk to this, but I understand the miscellaneous 4% to be sort of like administrative. Is that right? Or
Yeah.
this kind of, is it, are you,
I'm
gonna let you Google.
I'm also looking it up right
Okay.
now. Like I thought it was anyway.
So the new revised proposal that was presented tonight, it keeps that zero to the police that we like.
Goose egg for the cops.
15% will go to fire, 17% to youth and parks, 42% to economic development, 9 to homelessness, 14 to affordable housing, and still 4 to miscellaneous. So the change that comes is we see a 1% decrease in homelessness, a 7% increase in affordable housing, a 3% decrease in economic development,
Right. It's mainly it's doubling the housing, right?
Right, yeah.
And then shaving it off everything else. And that was thanks to Kathy Cresswell, who's a committee member, who's a longtime housing and homelessness advocate.
Right. So
it's interesting that housing and homelessness are like their own categories on this.
They are, though. They're intertwined,
I know, it's just,
but they're different.
Yeah.
And it, coming from what I would love to see is an equitable division of monies between homelessness and affordable housing, just because when we look out at the landscape of homelessness currently and what we are expecting as a result of the pandemic, I think we need to start to allocate more money to services to folks who are going to find themselves experiencing homelessness. But I'm not farting at the 14% to affordable housing, because I can get down with that too.
Yeah. It's like you hear people often sort of poo-poo the homelessness side of it when they look at a budget like this. And the reason they do is like, well, we want solutions. We don't want you to just keep feeding into this part of it. And it's like, they have no idea the level of need right now and how many people are literally dying because of this, right?
And I mean, the other thing to consider for folks as they're poo-pooing is that when a person is experiencing homelessness, there is something that has to be done in order to prepare them for housing, and it's called getting a person doc ready. It's getting them all of the documentation that they need in order to get into housing, and that's something that has to be done on the side of homeless services. We have to be the ones that are working very closely with folks to get them their birth certificate, to get them a copy of their social security card, to get them in order to get them an ID. And all of these things take a lot of time. It takes a lot of rapport building in order to get somebody to trust you. And so we need funding in order to employ caseworkers to do that stuff that is like up to the 4 of us. It's easy, right? Like, we can go on to the Department of Vital Records, pop in our credit card information, and grab ourselves a birth certificate. I mean, maybe we could even walk down to the Department of Vital Records to get that if we're from Sacramento. But if you were born in Alaska, ended up in Florida, ended up in Louisiana, and then you're in Sacramento and now are looking for a place to live, it's fucking difficult to get that paperwork.
Yeah. Also, I think the lion's share of funding that goes towards homelessness doesn't that usually go through our county as the continuum of care?
It does. And what is, that's we could do a whole episode on what that looks like and what the actual measurable outcomes of that money.
And the Darth Susans throwing a wrench into everything.
Yeah, I mean, that's a nightmare, a complete shit show. And we should probably, I wouldn't want anyone to paint anyone's driveway red over this.
Okay. Yeah. Sky, I thought you were going to say something.
No, I was not.
Okay.
Well, I was going to say that like it looks like it's zeroing out the police budget in total, but really it's just talking about a $40 million, which is about a quarter of the police budget. So it's still leaving 3/4 of the budget. And I mean, I know there's a lot of folks who would rather it go a lot further than that. I think it's a good start. So just throwing that to put it in context, because the chart looks extreme. So it looks like we just went like to nothing, but like that's really not what's happening.
Right. They were never supposed to be a part of it at all. Yeah. So really what we're doing, what this budget does is just returns it to the form that it was supposed to have taken when we all voted on it.
Right. Yeah. So it doesn't include the first half cent then, if I'm correct, right? Which a lot of that goes towards the police.
That's how I understand it.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought this was the whole thing.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, can I just say that like just the fact that it's this hard for us to answer these questions as pretty educated people who track this stuff is exactly the point. You know, I keep hearing from elected officials that are like, oh, they're mischaracterizing it, or oh, that's not how the money's spent. And I'm like, great, because we have no idea where the money is being spent. Right. And I felt like that was kind of the theme again tonight. It was like, oh yeah, we have performance metrics. Okay, great, show me the performance metrics. Oh no, we don't have it for this money.
We don't do that.
Okay, well then you don't have performance metrics? No, we do. It's like, well, what, either you do or you don't. Where's the money going? It shouldn't be this difficult to track. It really shouldn't.
Right. Yeah. That whole exchange between Flo, what's that woman's name?
Let's get to that in a minute. I just
all right.
Reflections on this budget portion. None were good?
I mean, that was, for me, that's the biggest thing is I'm like, you know, we've been trying to track for the people's budget just to create some basic charts and some basic trends. And it has been just like murder trying to get this pulled together. And we have some really great volunteers, but like it shouldn't take someone who's furloughed from work sitting down every day digging through PDFs and word searching to figure out where money has gone over time. It just shouldn't take this.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And we saw that, like, you know, the last time the Measure U commission met up, and it was just like numbers flying all over the place. And it's confusing for a reason, right? Because they don't want us to know. So I think it's a super valid and important point, Katie, that you're making, that like it's taking the four of us, you know, 20 minutes to try to unpack this stuff, and the four of us are also like pretty close to the issue and have been like keeping our finger on the pulse
for months.
I just checked the agenda item. She is trying to zero out the entire proposed budget for police for Measure U this year.
Oh, good.
It's not just from the second half.
Not just from the second half.
We're going to do the whole 41.7 million.
And thank you, Katie, for helping us clarify.
Yeah, for sure. No, I mean, it is like
5 minutes of Googling.
I do think there is something to like these things, like people's, you know, if you like listen to meetings like this, normally your eyes just glaze over. I do think there's something to that being a thing that's done on purpose so people don't pay attention. Like, I mean, it's hard to pay attention to this stuff, you know.
People need translators, and I think that's why it's so important what Flo did with these charts. It's why it's so important what so many people, it's very often has to be community advocates out there doing this, because journalists, there aren't any journalists anymore.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing the value of, you know, folks like Flo and Katie taking the time to really unpack this stuff for the community and get the word out, because once people know, they're fired up, right? It's just that people didn't know because the city has worked really hard to bury the truth.
I mean, it's also true, I think, that most people just don't expect their governments to represent them in a meaningful way, you know.
Yeah,
and
that's
I think like
point too.
when they do have like actual real significant representation, then I think they do get fired up, because they're like, oh wait, no, we can actually change things now. We can actually do something for the community. Cool. Because I think in general, people just feel disenfranchised and like completely separated from their representatives. And that's, I mean, you know, not to be super corny, but I think that's one of the most exciting things about Katie being elected. You know, it's
Yeah.
certainly the first time, like, since I've lived here, and I've been in this district now for like 20 years, that I felt like I had any connection to my representation, you know.
Yeah, I can tell you how many times I call somebody back and they're like, "You're calling me back?" I'm like, "Yes."
I was going to ask, like, how does it, you must feel the sort of weight of that, right? Daily, because I think a lot of people look at you and what you've had to say throughout your election process, and you get so jaded paying attention to this process, but like people really believe that you're gonna fight for them, and like how has that felt?
It's energizing, honestly, and I think the people have met the challenge, because I know it's not just about me. That's why we ran the campaign the way we did with all of those people. It was about movement building. That's why People's Budget is just as much about movement building as it is about getting input. We have a good theory as to where the numbers will lie, but having a bunch of people tell us what they think buys people into the process, and that's something that our council just doesn't understand. Is like, we may get to the same place, but process matters, and it builds like energy and it builds engagement, and that's what makes it easy to do big bold things. Is when you have 100 people call into a school board meeting saying defund SROs, like, you know, it happens because of that energy. So I've been really energized by the protests. I've been energized by all the calls and energy on the, like, I get social media, I get tweets, I get all sorts of things, and people are just ready. And I think we're really feeding off of each other more than, it's not one directional as you might think it is. It's very much like I'm getting it from folks just as much as they're getting it from me, I think.
That's cool.
Well, that's how it ought to be, right? I mean, that's
Yeah.
like, that's exactly how things should be in every district with all the representatives, you know?
Someday. Maybe
I want to
soon.
get into you, Skylar and Katie, you two were getting into like a really cool part of what happened tonight, and I felt terrible interrupting it. So let's get into the Measure U meeting. The reason they were meeting tonight, the first real portion of the agenda was the police coming down and explaining where their money comes from, what they're doing with all the money that they get that just like takes up this huge swath of our general fund and now Measure U funding. And then they started getting poked and prodded by the Measure U committee, who is like, well, why is the city taking all of this money for you? Skylar, can you just sort of dive into that and kind of how this exchange came about?
I mean, to me, it just kind of, it looked like they kind of had their stock answers for this stuff, but really like the information that is pertinent to this and like the information that you need to recommend a budget was not available to the Measure U committee, or commission. So it was a whole lot of people being like, okay, well, like, so I see that we allotted this amount in 2019 and now it's been a year. So like, what are the metrics as far as like, okay, we spent this amount of this with this goal in mind. Did you hit the goal? Did you not hit the goal? Did you need more money? Did you not need all the money that you had? Which seemed to me, I mean, I'm just a podcast guy. So, you know, I'm certainly not an expert, but it seems like if you're designing a budget and going to recommend like how you're going to do the next year's budget, that those are pretty like basic questions, right? Like it would be like, hey, like, okay, we did this thing here. Let's see, how did that go? You guys are like responsible for like hundreds of millions of dollars. So somebody is paying attention, somebody's keeping track of like these numbers. And after tonight and watching the police kind of try and explain those things or try and sidestep around those things, I'm not like 100% sure that anybody is keeping track of that stuff, because it seemed to be a lot of like, oh, well, there was, we don't have to give you that information was one of the things that kept getting floated. Another one was, oh, well, we do have that info, but I have to look it up. I don't know. It was very, or like, you know, or, oh, that's this department and not this department. But if I call this department, they're going to send me to this. And it was just a whole lot of basically people, like basically the cops just being like, either we don't have this information at all, or we do and you can't have it, which is kind of a wild thing to say to the Measure U committee at this thing.
I think we should also mention that during the start of this meeting, when SPD was given the opportunity to explain how the fuck they're spending all this goddamn money, what happened was a direct line item read of a document that was provided to everyone because of the Brown Act on the website, the city's website, and it was a staff person reading exactly what's on this sheet and then saying, we expect to spend all the money.
Yeah,
and
after everyone.
And then reading the next line item, we expect to spend all the money. And that went on for, they told us how they intend to spend $45 million that they do expect
piece by piece. Yeah, going through salaries and equipment and programs and all of this shit.
I wanted to be motherfucker, you give me I could tell you how I expect to spend $45 million too. Like that I expect to spend it if I had it, but that's not what we're here to talk about.
I expect to spend this money. I got a lot of good laundry done during that portion.
I was yelling into my boiling pasta.
One thing that's really exciting and inspiring to me about this committee is that I think City Council is just figuring out how badly they fucked up by agreeing to this committee. And it started in the first few months of the committee starting. Everyone on that committee is super, super fucking smart. And it's all women and people of color. And they're just like, they know... Like, these are people that just like know exactly how to get the information that they're going to want to fucking get. And when they were asking for the city to give them like their general finances, the city was hemming and hawing and thought they could strong arm them. But they had everybody from all these different corners of the community on this committee, pushing all the right levers, and they were forced to give them this. And then once they did, like, for us journalists, like, this is transparency that we don't get to fucking see ever. And it's suddenly there. And so they're doing the same thing to the police. They're going to do it again to the fire department next month. And that's another very bloated department. Like, yes, we all love firefighters, but that's also a fact.
Right.
And tonight was such a huge win because Flo and others up there managed to get them to say, we have this data, we don't make it public. And so
we don't want you to have it.
And then
but maybe they do, maybe they don't. If I didn't have those numbers and I was on public record and somebody was asking me about them, I might say that I did, but you just can't look at them. Like, that's
they really
kind of like
don't
a classic
know.
response.
I can tell you stories here. It's really, you shudder to think about just how terrible the budget process is. But like the city manager's budget, for instance, I remember digging into this whatever year Measure U was getting put on the ballot. So that was 2018, right? So 2 years ago, we were digging in and they have these sheets. They're PDFs. They're called PODs. There's a stack of them this thick, and it's supposed to outline every single program and what it does, but it's not year to year. And sometimes they literally have one sentence on it. My favorite one was for special projects in the city manager. It was like over $1 million. And the sentence said, could be for things like rail yards and riverfront. And we were like,
could be.
So, like, is this a new program? Is this an old program? How did the money get used last year? Like, what's this like? What are the staffing levels like? Are these new positions? And they're like, oh, I don't know. Public Records Act. This was done. And so we were sitting there going through just the city manager's budget because he had gone from $3 million to $11 million in just 5 years. And we're like, okay, where's this $8 million going in the city manager's budget? And every time we'd poke into something, Public Records Act. And we're like, wait a minute, do you really not know? And that's when she brought out the shiny neighborhood services mailers and said, oh no, these are the community programs. Look at the Measure U money. That's what the community's money is. And we're like, no, it's all our money. Like, I don't care. Like, yeah, that's cool that you have a new pool open in this neighborhood over here. But like, I want to know where the $8 million is going that the city manager has.
Right.
And that's not too much to ask. That's really not too much to ask as a taxpaying resident. It's really not. We all pay taxes. We should be able to track this. And I've heard horror stories from city staff who've off the record been like, yeah, we're piecing together paperwork orders to try to figure out what's been going on. I'm like, what?
What's up?
There's no spreadsheet. No. I'm like, okay.
Well, yeah, okay.
terrible.
Well, conceding that then, we will, on that side of it, we will find out if they are as successful with the cops as they have been with the finance folks. We might find out just where they're not making metrics to meet. They are not keeping track of these particular programs. They're just throwing money out the window. And the data that they do have, because I think there is some data that they do have that they don't make public, we might get to see that go public too. And that will be huge. And I don't think people understand just how opaque law enforcement agencies throughout the country have been. For journalists, it's been a fucking nightmare over the years to try and get any sort of information out of them. California, little by little, is getting better with public records acts and things like that. And now we have body cams. Little by little, we're starting to see a little light shined onto them. But every little inch of light that we shine onto them, it's just a sea of cockroaches scattering. And go ahead, Shannon.
I was gonna say, I think that point was made so clear tonight in the meeting when all of these questions are asked about the detail around the money being spent, and the response from Dawn Holm, friend
of the show.
Yeah, new.
I'm in the market.
Show.
I'm in the market for a new yoga partner.
I was trying to think of a new animal that she could be the mistress of.
When she's like, so here's the deal with the cops. We get all this money, and nobody tells us that we have to spend it here or there. We just have to spend it to the bottom line. And then we're done. And that's just how this works. And then there's the pushback that's like, wait a minute, there is an intention for how certain monies are going to be spent. Can we talk about where we at with that? How much has been spent for the bear cat? I have to be careful because we call it the bear claw outside of.
I prefer the
It's
bear
okay,
claw,
we can call it.
actually, yeah.
The bear claw is much better.
I think it's way better. So how, and also we're talking about how much money gets spent. Oh, that was it. How much money gets spent for was it not sexual assault? What was it? That sexual assault?
No, it was human trafficking or sex trafficking.
Sex trafficking, and they're like, oh well, it wasn't requested, so we're just not going to spend that. We don't have it in the budget. Anyway, all of this to say that the cops don't give a fuck. They do. They're just we do what we want.
Well, and you know what it reminds me of, and I'm going to say it because I hope it'll knock some sense into some folks in the city. It sounds a lot like Scott Jones. Because that's his whole thing at the county, right? You give me as much money, I spend it how I want. And I was appalled to hear the lack of explanation tonight for these line items, because it's we don't have that set up. Our police chief is not elected. You do not have an independent department. You are underneath the city council, and you're supposed to spend this the way the city council says. But they do have two metrics I do want to point out, because they use them every time you talk about police. It's the things that they care about, which is pre-2008 staffing and cops per capita compared to other comparable cities. Those are the two metrics that they think matter. And I think if you ask anybody else on the street, those would probably not be the two metrics that they would mention when it comes to public safety.
Yeah, I don't want more people doing a job very badly.
What was the thing? Did anybody catch and have a clearer picture than I did of the part where we're paying a woman a six-figure salary who already has a full-time job for a second full-time job, but she can do all of that because she's a really impressive woman, according to, was that
Assistant City Manager Chris Conlon?
Chris Conlon. Who is this woman? Does anybody know?
She's somebody who should probably just have one full-time job.
Her name is Bridget, and I'm
it's
blanking
Bridget
on her last
Dean.
name.
Yeah,
Dean.
so this is the person who is heading up the $5 million program for people who aren't cops to answer 911 calls that don't need cops at them, right?
Yeah.
So the cops responded to that by saying, okay, the problem is that cops go to these calls where we don't need cops. So the police were like, okay, no problem. We're going to hire this cop, give her a second job to do this as well. And yeah, Steinberg was on Twitter like, dude, this is so great. Howard Chan made the best decision here. Everybody paying attention is like, I'm sorry, did you guys just give yourself another $5 million?
They did.
Yeah, they did.
Blow this fucking thing up?
It's the whole, like, the city just like this whole, we need alternatives to the 911 system. You know what the best way to get some alternatives are? We should probably hire a cop. We should hire a cop.
More cops.
Cop's gonna know.
To be not cops.
Yeah. But this is like, this is a really impressive cop, because this cop teaches social workers how to be police in social work, basically.
Right.
Oh, it teaches,
like
she's teaching police officers to be social workers.
Right.
That's they're sworn officers that are being taught to go out and deal with social calls.
My favorite thing was the council or the committee member who repeatedly was like, so it's a cop that you're training to be a social work, or is that, I just want to be clear. That you're
well, this woman specifically too has like a history of, like, she's organized a bunch of like the raids on the camps of people who are experiencing homelessness and whatnot. Like she's like,
because
I've never met her personally.
Our new not cop?
Yes, our new not cop. I've never met her personally. She kind of sounds like a shitty social worker if like just based on her fucking resume.
Those who cannot do teach, which is why some of us become professors.
So just in case, like, I wasn't clear about that at the beginning, the cops are giving themselves another $5 million to run this program that was supposed to be done so that somebody else besides them would do it, and they're paying this woman an additional 6-figure salary per year. Or we are, as the taxpayers, we are paying this woman an additional 6-figure salary to do it. Which is fantastic. I love that. I love city leadership in this town.
My big request: don't hire a cop. Just stop hiring cops.
Yeah,
even cops that you're saying aren't cops. Stop hiring cops.
Why? It's like, just here's the thing that we don't like here.
What is that, Shannon?
Cops.
So would you stop hiring them? Would you stop hiring them?
Oh,
because they're a bunch of assholes and all they do is terrorize communities. Get rid of them.
It's like putting like putting a mane on your cow and being like, oh, look at my lion. I got a zoo now.
My other so another highlight for me was when they were like, so we apparently have like a military vehicle that the cops use called a peacekeeper. Oh my gosh,
I love this. The peacekeeper, yeah.
The peacekeeper, which apparently, according to the police, is like some busted ass hoopty piece of shit that breaks down all the time. We have to fix it all the time. So that's why we bought the Bear Claw, was so that we could give this busted ass peacekeeper like back to the military, or I don't know, maybe to Modesto or somebody.
So
like
the military,
that.
They said.
Yeah, right.
The military gave it to us. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So that's why we have the Bear Claw, because the peacekeeper was a hoopty piece of shit. Dave pointed out earlier in a chat thread, probably gets its name because the cops can't get to protests in it to escalate them into riots.
Yeah, it keeps the peace.
It keeps the peace.
Because it can't fucking move.
Stranded on I-80.
I do want to harp on one last thing in the police budget that I don't think anybody in Measure U committee gets, but I only get because I like to eavesdrop on ACLU coalition calls. Lexapol.
Oh, yeah.
System that they're using to download policies. And if you Google articles on this, not only have there been multiple
explain
lawsuits.
what it is a little bit?
So Lexipol is a system that basically creates like template policies and practices for police and law enforcement around the country. It's supposed to be a time saver, helps train your people. You don't have to track all that pesky state legislation. Just let us tell you what to do. And then you can take that and train all of your officers to do it this way.
Sounds like a really good way to do things.
It seems like a fantastic way to do things. It's a for-profit company, completely not regulated. And what has happened multiple times is people have adopted these policies and they've been sued over them because they have policies like, for instance, if you have a thick English, like a non-English accent, that is cause to investigate someone for potential ICE referrals. Like that's like
that sounds right.
Policy that they have, and it's still a policy that they have. It is racist.
Well, this is the cops though, so they get a pass on racism.
Like you have an accent,
like,
and so I'm going to assume that you might be here without papers, and I'm going to go through the process of verifying your citizenship, which is very, very not okay. And many other policies, they've been sued multiple times, and Sacramento uses Lexipol, which is just mind-boggling to me that there's just this line item in there for almost $100,000, and we're just like, oh yeah, let's just
we pay for this.
Mm-hmm.
And then and then also like once they get sued, that money does not come out of the police budget. So that's like a whole other thing. That's more taxpayer money that we then have to pay to people who are suing them on behalf of the police department, who already have this crazy ass budget and don't ever have to like be held accountable financially for any of the fuck ups by any of their officers.
That's great. Lexipol teaching cops around the country to do unconstitutional things. All of those cops around the country getting sued over their unconstitutional behavior, and then their taxpayers having to pay for it.
That's why they want all those miscellaneous sections in the budget.
We both pay for their salaries and Lexipol, and we pay for the lawsuits. And the funny thing is, I will say, because we've been talking to a lot of national groups about people's budget, because we've been looking for help, because we're like, this is like, what is going on with this budget? And I have to tell you that national data groups who track police are like, Sacramento's budget is like really hard. It's really opaque. And they were like, just finding line items, like, is this the settlements? Are the settlements over here? And I'm like, why can't, you're a national expert organization and you can't tell me where the settlement money comes from? Like, we still don't know where the money comes from. We've been trying for 3 or 4 weeks now. We've been everything short of submit PRAs, and that's where we're at. It's wild. So if you feel bad, don't worry. We're actually one of the worst in the nation, I guess.
This might be a real watershed. Yeah. Well, I mean, let me put my sweet summer child hat on. This might be a watershed moment. And we really got to see on the stage in front of us tonight just how, first of all, opaque SAC PD is, and also a hint of how absolutely incapable they are of regulating and keeping track of themselves and taxpayers' money. And I look forward to them getting pushed more and more on this.
Same.
So we don't have much time, but I wanted to jump into one thing that's sort of on the tip of everyone's tongue these days in Sacramento. The strong mayor push. It's official that Darrell Steinberg is going forward with it, and you know that we're all very excited about it.
We're huge proponents of that on this show.
I've been phone banking for Darrell between my yoga sessions with Chief Han. So Katie, can you, I know you've given sound bites on this to basically every news outlet in the region, but can you expound upon sort of where you stand on it and why you stand where you stand?
I'm a very big hell no on this. And the main reason that I'm a big no is the veto authority. I see absolutely zero reason why we could get to 5 votes on anything, budget or ordinance, and have one person be able to tell us no. I don't see why that's necessary. I don't see why that's healthy. I don't see how that's helped any other city who has strong mayor do better policy for people of color, or just in general anybody. So that's my deal breaker issue. I think we all agree that the city manager needs more oversight. I think we can all agree that there's a lot of systems change that could happen, but even the very process by which this has been developed, which has been completely behind closed doors, all we've heard is like phone calls and like, I heard this and so told me that, is like just as emblematic of what's broken. And so we're like doing the thing that's broken to be like, it's okay, trust not this person, now this new person, and I'll fix it. And it's like, no, I don't believe that's how this works. It's the opposite direction. I could keep going if you want to let me. I'll slow myself. I'll slow my roll there because I know you.
No, I feel like I've been talking too much, so I was just hoping someone else.
I think the thing that stands out for me about strong mayor is if you have an actual leader, you don't need a strong mayor. Like it is exactly what a weak leader does. Because he's unable to articulate compelling reasoning behind anything that he does. He's unable to garner support from people because his shit is fucked. And at this point, he's like, you know what the way to fix this is? I got to get all the power. Like, what is that? I don't.
It's not based on, and I'll bring in a couple of points too, because I've been talking a lot to Mai Vang about this, and she brought in some points that I had not thought of, because I had my own points where I'm like, okay.
Mai Vang, city council candidate Mai Vang of District 8?
Is also opposed to strong mayor proposal.
Okay.
And she has her own reasons.
I was saying that because I want listeners to know.
Oh, thanks. Yes, sorry. I need to do a plug for my girl Mai. She's running. She's awesome. But I mean, you have the fact that the cities with strong mayor have no better outcomes, right? Like, let's just take that at its face. Like, okay, let's say we have problems to solve. Things aren't better. Shannon just tapped her microphone.
Inadvertently, because I saw this thing with my hair happening and then attacked my microphone. I apologize.
It's okay. No, things are no better in cities with strong mayor. And so like, if we could look at these cities and see magical, better outcomes for the public, it'd be like, okay, but no, we're centralizing power, we're moving away. We're going to have one of the most diverse councils we've ever had in Sacramento's history in December, regardless if it's Mai or Les. And now we're going to centralize power away from the council. Part of that includes adding a 9th council member, because now the mayor is no longer a part of the council. So now we've got a new district coming in, and we don't know what, that's a whole nother level of politics.
Right.
But what Mai brought in, which I hadn't even thought about, is she's like, Katie, if he's not a part of the voting block for the council, is he still subject to the Brown Act? Wouldn't he be able to talk to any council member he wanted and whip the votes that he needed if he was trying to prevent a veto override? You know, it's just, these are the things that really bother me. And part of what's always said is that the mayor, the city manager isn't elected, the mayor is elected. I need to have more of a role. Well, he already has double the budget of any other council member. And I know this now because I've seen budgets. He has all the staff resources. He's got all the relationships. He already presides over the council. He helps dictate the agenda. City manager is meeting with him constantly. Like, he has a lot of implicit power outside of the stuff that he has explicitly. But the thing about the mayor is that overwhelmingly voter turnout is in wealthy white neighborhoods in Sacramento. And so the mayor isn't elected by people in Meadowview. He's elected by people in more affluent neighborhoods. And what does that mean if we're putting all the power in one person who doesn't need communities of color to keep power? It raises a whole lot of questions. So yeah, I don't see any good reason why. I think if we all agree that we need more transparency and accountability, like, let's solve that problem. Let's not like try to do something else and say, if you give me this thing I want, then I'll help solve your problem. That's not how this should work. We don't have to pay that price.
The thing to me is he has time and again promised us things and didn't follow through on it. And now he's saying, trust me, just trust me one more time, guys.
A month after he fucking sticks the National Guard on us, he's like, hey guys, here's the problem though, is that like, I don't have enough executive authority.
Yeah.
Like, dude, get fucked. What are you talking about? We said this on the pod a couple episodes ago or whatever, but I think it's a solid point, is that like, I'd be into this if like we were in situations where city council was trying to do this awful stuff and Darrell Steinberg didn't want it to happen and was like, no, we shouldn't, but he couldn't get the vote. And so like awful stuff was happening because he couldn't veto it. But like, that's not at all even kind of what is happening. Like, what are you talking about? Like, what could you possibly be worried about? I mean, you know, and my pet theory on this is that it's people like Katie and Mai coming in and like that what that portends as far as a change to the city council that he's trying to get out in front of. And to that, I say, get fucked, sir. I'm not into your fucking plan.
Good day.
That's the thing, like, we can't
day,
compensate
sir.
for bad leadership. So, like, if the council's not doing a good job, then we need to elect better council members. And that's why I ran. And that's, like, why, you know, Mai's running, because she thinks she can do a better job and a good job for her community. It's like, that was another thing that keeps getting brought up is like, well, we could pass reforms faster if we didn't need 5 votes. And I'm like, well, that's the same for the bad stuff too. Like, if you have a mayor with this authority, and it could be a different person, because this is a permanent change. It's actually, I'm like, let's take Darrell out of it. Like, forget Darrell. I'm like, anybody who gets elected to this position, and we've learned that, unfortunately, with our president, this is a lesson, right? It's just like, what happens when someone bad comes in and they have too much power and they start destroying shit behind them left and right. It's like, not comparing any mayor, past, present, or current to Donald Trump, but just saying this should be a foreboding example of why distributed power matters, because you need more voices to help control the narrative and ensure the public's needs are met. And
and we need to
centralizing
think
it doesn't
deeply
help.
structurally on that regard.
Yeah, and to do this is irresponsible, honestly. Without, like, we have no idea who could be elected in the future. We have no idea what type of campaigns are coming to Sacramento. To give that much power to one position because you yourself think you can do good is selfish. It just is selfish.
Yeah.
And
Well,
there's
guys,
going to be a bunch of stuff put in there. I see this foreboding of what we call Christmas tree policy. I've done legislative work for like a decade now, right? We call this Christmas tree bills, where it's like, I'm going to give you each a little something that you want to hope that you'll like give me the one thing that I want. And I'll bundle it all together so you can't separate it, so that you feel like you have to say yes. That's not good governance either. And that's where I think this is headed. And that really bothers me. You know, I feel like we're going to see a lot of stuff that Flo's been asking for in this. I feel like we're going to see a lot of stuff that other people have been asking for, so that it makes it really hard to campaign against. But we just got to keep it about what it is. It's about giving power to one person. I mean, it's just that simple.
Well, guys, speaking of the public good, I have heard tell. So I'm really interested. One of the things that I've been really interested with this summer so far is finding and listening to and taking in the best and finest and the most perfect takes that I can find on the internet.
Perfect being the goodest of the good.
The goodest of the most perfect of the takes, right?
Always the goodest.
So I don't know. I feel like I've heard them all, but I was wondering if maybe you knew of a website where I could go to find there, where they have more of these kinds of perfect takes that I love to consume, all consolidated in a nice little bite-sized package for me.
Sure.
Anybody?
No, I'd love to take that. You know, I'd like to ask about your current occupational situation at some point, Skylar, but
It's bad, Dave. It's real bad.
But yeah, so there is such a place, boys and girls and children, and it's called voicesrivercity.com. You can find all the perfect takes from the last 3 years, probably most of the perfect takes that we've seen around the city. It's good to see them popping up all over the place now, though, too. But the site has, if you go all the way back 3 years, some great news coverage, some great arts coverage, some really weird humor, some community essays. It's really been all over the place the last few years, and we're actually diving more and more into journalism again. So that's exciting, especially with these elections coming up. I'm sure we'll be doing a lot more with the Sac Follows the Money project. You can find us on all the social medias, Facebook, Voices River City, Twitter @Voices River City, Instagram @Voices River City. And there's always some weird little nugget on our Instagram. So it's definitely worth following. And it's a lot of
those
fun.
Nuggets.
Yeah. And then, we're on YouTube, Voices River City. So if you want to see our pretty little faces as we're talking, go there, subscribe, smash that like button.
It's the love button. Thank you.
Smash that love button.
Gosh. How many times do we have to tell you this?
Oh my God. I feel weird saying it now. You guys made me feel weird after a show or two. And then, then we're on Patreon, and you can go down as low as $5 a month pledging. And that's a beer at the bar that none of us are going to right now if we're good citizens trying to battle this coronavirus. And that's that. We do some really interesting sort of special content on there, but we do have friends and listeners and comrades who cannot afford that $5 a month. And if you reach out, we'll just give you a link to the premium content you're looking for. So feel free to do that. Did I hit everything? I am on Twitter at Kempa, YOUKNOWKEMPA.
I'm up there too. I'm at Guillotine for You. That's Guillotine, the number 4 YOU.
I am Shan N.D. Stevens.
And Katie.
Oh, I get to go too. Cool.
You get to go, yeah.
I'm Katie for
Councilmember-elect.
Yeah, Katie with the number 4.
I think you should tell us.
Yeah, and
Sorry.
follow me to see all of my thoughts about Aggie Square, about Strong Mayor, Katie for Council.
Katie, the number 4.
Yes.
COUNCIL.
Thank you.
Yes.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you.
I know things are crazy in this transition, but in as much as they're crazy, also like we're captives in our own homes. So it's, it's good to have a claw with you.
Yeah, most definitely, Katie. It is always a pleasure to get to talk and kind of hang out with you a little bit. So thanks for coming on the show.
You ever want to pop on, you just send us a text message.
Yeah, you just let us know. You can come on any of the shows.
I love all this great content. It keeps me company on my walks a few times a day so I don't lose my mind. So
that's great.
Are you feeling like they're perfect takes? Are you?
I am. I get that feeling. Yeah.
All right.
Wow,
that's a hot endorsement right there.
That's a seal of approval. Yeah.
Flo, come back.
Yeah, Flo, we still love you too, though.
I bet Flo is still like reading comments in the meeting right now.
All right, guys. Well, that's the show for today. I guess we will see you guys in a few days. And until then, we love you and we want you to be safe.
To be sane. Stay sane.
Do I do both now?
Yeah, do Flo's part. I'll do your part.
Stay healthy.
And stay the fuck away from me.
Oh boy.
I think I sound like maybe like kind of more hostile when I say that.
It was like weirdly, it was like hostile, but also a little more radio-y.
Yeah.
Stay the fuck away from me.
Very effective.
Folks, stay the fuck away.
Yeah, I'm trying to channel Zach Brannigan over here. All right, let's get out of here. Katie, thanks again. It's been a pleasure.
Yes, bye.
Bye, everyone.